You've probably seen that leaked footage of the mysterious electric car test mule ripping around the skid pad where the cameraman, Larry Chin, was hiding behind two comically skinny trees, and the car stopped perfectly in front of the camera. Well, by now, the full release video has come out, and we obviously know that car was the Mach E 1400. Regardless of questionable marketing tactics, it's clear that this car is insane. It's got 1,400 horsepower. It's got independent power to the rear and front wheels. It's got an otherworldly electric whine. So I wanted to know more about this car, so I called up Von Gittin Jr. and he told me about it, but there was one thing he wasn't allowed to tell me, and that's how much torque it makes. No problem, Mr. Von Gittin Jr., keep your secrets, that's okay. So I did my own calculations, and what I found out was mind-blowing. How does this thing make more torque than 4 V8 F-150s? And what the heck does T-Pain have to do with all this? Well, let's find out. Thank you again to our friends at Off the Record for sponsoring today's episode of Bumper to Bumper. Let's face it, I like to drive fast. I like to ride fast. And that means I may bend the rules just a little bit. And I know that means my chances of getting pulled over on one of these bikes back here is exponentially higher. There's no need to worry because you can fight your tickets with the help of Off the Record. See, when you get pulled over and get that dreaded ticket, not only is the monetary fine from the ticket gonna punch you boom, boom, right in the freaking wallet, but so is the more than likely insurance premium increase. All you have to do is download the app, enter some basic ticket information like when and where you were cited, what law you allegedly broke, and Off the Record will connect you with a well-vetted local licensed attorney to fight that ticket on your behalf. Go to offtherecord.com/donut or use the Off the Record app and use code DONUT to get 10% off your first case. Thank you guys for supporting the companies that support us here at Donut. To start out, the Mach E uses 3-phase AC induction motors. It has 3 motors that power the front wheels and 4 motors that power the rear wheels. And these motors are YASA P400R motors. And what's cool about them is that they're stackable. Similar to a 3-rotor or 4-rotor rotary engine, you can stack them together while sharing a common shaft in order to produce more power. The technical name for them is axial flux motors, but some people call them pancake motors because they're thin and they have a very large diameter. You can stack them like flapjacks. You know who loves flapjacks? Uncle Jer loves flapjacks and French toast. I cook it 4 times a week. Get at me if you want my recipe. Each motor is only 4.2 inches wide. So in the rear, you have a motor setup that's only 16.8 inches in length with a diameter of only 12 inches, roughly 1,900 cubic inches, weighing in at 250 pounds. And because they weigh less and take up less space, their placement in a vehicle can be more ideal. So with axial flux motors, the copper windings inside the housing are arranged in a way that allow for a smaller form factor. It's kind of like a regular old V6 motor versus VW's VR6. It still has 6 cylinders, but they're just arranged differently. By optimizing the location and orientation of the coils, you get a motor that produces an equivalent amount of torque and horsepower in a much smaller package. Each one of these motors makes 160 kilowatts of peak power at 700 volts. 1 kilowatt is equal to 1.36 horsepower, so each motor gives you around 217 horsepower. 868 horsepower in the rear and 651 horsepower in the front, for a total of 1,522 horsepower. And because of their light weight, they have a ridiculous power to weight ratio. The 5.0 in the Ford F-150 makes 395 horsepower and weighs 444 pounds. That's 0.88 horsepower per pound. Now the motors in the Mach E make 3.5 horsepower per pound. That's almost 4 times as much. Now, if you noticed before, I said a total of 1,522 horsepower. So where does 1,400 horsepower come from? Well, with any motor, you can never be 100% efficient. You have friction and heat losses. There's actually peak efficiency ratings for these motors, and it's right at 96%. So when you factor that in, it puts the horsepower figure right above 1,400 horsepower. Now, what about the torque rating? Horsepower ain't much without that torque? Well, as I said, Ford wouldn't tell me, but we're gonna figure it out ourselves. But first, we have to understand the full picture. We have to look at how these motors get their fuel. And in this case, it's from lithium-ion batteries. The reason electric cars today are even feasible is because of lithium-ion batteries. It's really the only practical battery technology that can provide the amount of energy an electric car requires. But not all lithium batteries are created equal. There are lots of different types built for different purposes. Part of the problem with lithium-ion batteries is having to manage heat, lifespan, cost, discharging capabilities. For the Mach E 1400, they use a lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide battery, or for my chemistry buffs, LiNiMnCO02. The 1400 uses thousands of these battery cells, which I'm going to call NMC cells, to make a pack with a capacity of 56.8 kilowatt hours. A bigger battery pack will have a higher number of kilowatt hours and it will hold more electricity. But that doesn't tell you all that much. And Ford, like I said before, they're pretty tight-lipped about the specs of the battery. So how can we quantify it into something that equates to performance? Well, with a little teeny bit of math and a little bit of guesswork, we can actually calculate some more important metrics. So to do this, I'm going to look at a Tesla battery. It's comprised of 16 individual modules. Each module has 444 batteries that are made up of 74 cells wired in parallel, with 6 of those voltage cells wired in series. Now, each voltage cell is 3.6 volts, and when you get 6 of them wired in series, you get 21.6 volts per module. Now, when you wire those 16 individual modules together in series, you get 346 volts. Great. Now, each module weighs 55.8 pounds for a total of 892 pounds. Let's just round up because numbers rule my life and they got to be even. It's the 900 pounds, and we get 0.38 volts per pound. Now, I know the Mach E battery weighs 1,500 pounds because Von Gittin Jr. told me. And if we assume that Ford is operating at the upper limit of an NMC cell at 4.2 volts instead of 3.6 volts like in the Tesla, that's a 16.6 increase. The Mach E battery is producing peak voltage right at 680 volts. Sick. Now we have this number, but what the heck does it mean? Well, think of voltage as speed. The more volts you have, the faster you can spin the motors. And interestingly enough, if we look at the electric motors used in the Mach E, those YASA P400Rs, they make peak power right at 700 volts. So it's safe to say that we're in the ballpark. But if voltage is speed, what about current? Well, rotational speed is proportional to voltage applied, and torque is proportional to current pulled. So the faster you want to accelerate, the more torque you need, and the more current needs to get dumped. So for the purposes of this video, current equals torque. Now let's hop on the old Jerry bus. Actually, no, we don't need to do that. Can you hand me that drill? So let's say that the motor inside this power drill is an AC motor. Now, if I put no load on it and I want to get it to spin faster, I just pull the trigger. And when I do that, it increases the frequency of the motor and the motor spins faster. Now, what happens when I put a load on the drill by putting my hand over it like this to stop it, right? Well, without getting into a lot of complex things like back EMF or slip or other induction motor concepts, the more load that you put on it, the more force you need to overcome that load. So the motor will draw more current, producing more torque, which will overcome the load of my hand trying to stop it from spinning. Ow. Don't do that, actually, it's really dumb. One of the great things about an electric motor is that it can generate useful torque over a very wide range of rotational speeds. That's very different from a gas or diesel engine, which needs to build up speed to produce more torque. Look at the torque graph of an EV versus an ICE. One is like this, and one is like this. Now, the component of the Mach E that is regulating all that speed and torque is the inverter. The inverter is like a carburetor, but instead of air and fuel, it's dishing out voltage and current. It's a pretty complex piece of equipment that has a few main functions in the Mach E. Now, the first thing it does is take direct current from the battery and converts it into alternating current. The second thing that it does is it phases that current. The motors in the Mach E are what's called three-phase AC induction motors, meaning they operate on three separate alternating currents, which are offset from each other in time. So the inverter in the Mach E doesn't produce just one AC output, it produces three. Now you can see here that there's a two-way connection for the DC input, a positive and a negative terminal, and three connectors for the AC cables that feed the motor. And in the Mach E, each motor gets its own inverter for a total of 7 inverters. The inverter also has what's called a VFD, which stands for variable frequency drive. So to change the speed of an AC motor, you need to alter the frequency. That's what the VFD does. And finally, the inverter also does something called regen or regeneration. Now, when you take your foot off the pedal, the motor becomes a generator which sends charge to the battery. It also does something in the Mach E, and that's called braking. Now, depending on their controller settings, the Mach E can control the amount of braking applied when you take your foot off the pedal. You want 10% braking when you lift off? No problem. You want to go on the other end of the spectrum and lock up the wheels? Sure, they can do that too. Now remember, this is a test bed for Ford, so they could program this car to be a one-pedal car using regen as the only source of braking. Okay, so that is how energy is stored and how it is converted for use. But what about the torque? Did we ever figure out how much torque these things are making? Okay, let's do that right now. I've teased you long enough. So the peak torque for each motor is 370 Newton meters. That's 273 pound-feet of torque. Again, we have 7 motors at 96% efficiency. We're at 1,800 pound-feet of torque. And that's the motor torque. That's the torque that matters. To put that in perspective, a 2020 Ford F-150 with the biggest engine option, the 5.0 V8, it produces 400 pound-feet of torque. So when I mentioned that the Mach E 1400 makes more torque than 4 F-150s, I wasn't being clickbaity. I was being real. So you might be asking yourself, didn't Uncle Jim mention T-Pain at the top of this? But T-Pain did help design the sound of this car, which I think is pretty cool. A big hang up with internal combustion engine lovers is the lack of sound EVs make. And I get it, there's nothing quite like the sound of a cross-plane V8 rumble. And knowing that, Von Gittin and Mr. Tallahassee Payne himself developed the futuristic sound for this Beats. It's what Von described as their interpretation of what the car of the future should sound like. Piped through 2 military spec speakers that you can hear over a mile away, which is pretty neat given you'd want to hear this thing coming. I want to thank Ford Performance and Von Gittin Jr. and RTR for talking with us about this car. There were a ton of nifty things they engineered on this thing that we didn't even get to go into. The aero alone could house an entire episode. I suggest you go watch his video of him and Kim Block ripping this thing around. We'll be back next week with another B2B. Hit like, hit subscribe. Bye for now.